Heads up, we have a new FreightWaves group for you to check out. The Playbook, your roadmap to success in trucking. Built by Adam Wingfield, a 22-year trucking industry veteran, it's the comprehensive resource you've been waiting for. It's a one-stop resource for success. It includes a digital learning hub with step-by-step courses and training on compliance, finance, operations, and sales, masterclasses, which are bi-weekly sessions diving deep into the key areas of trucking and business growth. And there's the Long Haul podcast, and you can hear from industry experts on growing your trucking business. And there's also a partner portal, which lets you connect with vetted industry partners to grow your business effectively. Check it out and see you on the internet. Welcome to Running on Ice, the coolest community in freight. I'm your host, Mary O'Connell, bringing you the latest tech updates, warehouse news, and everything happening in the cold chain world. Not only is there the coolest show in freight, but there's also Running on Ice, the newsletter that could not be colder. You can subscribe to that on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. Today, we welcome Alan Ruber, Vice President Modal Operations at Redwood Logistics. Welcome to the show, Alan.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited for today. This is something we haven't really covered much on the cold chain side of things. And that's kind of, it's something that is obviously going to be very relevant for everyone potentially very soon. There have been existing tariffs that are in place throughout anything that's getting imported into the U.S. But now there's like a little bit of spice getting added to it. Before we get too far into that, though, let's get some background on you and how you got started at Redwood.
Sure. I came to Redwood in 2014 to start the temp control mode here, and that's grown into a few other modes that have been brought into the fold. And we're still rocking strong, moving a ton of temp control freight, flatbed freight, intermodal, LTL, and all that is in my world of modes.
You could say that you are the one mode to rule them all.
I am the one mode to rule them all. That's right. We'll lower the ring reference for people that aren't nerds.
Does it come with a ring? Does it come with a really cool ring?
No, actually, I'm going to request that. If we hit our goals this year, I want a cheap and ship ring. It's a good call out.
I think so. I think
one of the new ones that opens up and there's a stadium. We can just do the office or something in Chicago or Dallas. Yeah, I like that idea.
That's a good idea. We'll have to send that up the chain or whatever it is. So as we talked earlier, obviously tariffs are not new to anyone that is doing any sort of international importing or anyone that has a global supply chain. But there are obviously proposed tariffs that are potentially going into effect at the end of the year, but then there's also just new tariffs getting added to things. So how do these proposed tariffs on imported goods, how do they really affect the costs within the cold chain, obviously, other than just make them increase?
Yeah, so at the moment, I can't tell if it's market shift or seasonality or reactions to the tariffs, most likely a mixture of all of those. But we're definitely seeing a push from our refrigerated customers in terms of contract freight rates. And I feel like it's like this last ditch effort. And it's certainly not new. The last couple of years, we've seen rates really significantly drop. And I do feel, though, this renewed intensity, and that maybe it's just a last ditch effort for our customers to try to grab as much savings as they can before these tariffs have a significant impact on their bottom line.
I think that's, I've seen a increased, I don't necessarily there hasn't really been an increase in contract compliance that I'm aware of, on the reefer side of things, because, we've seen outbound tender rejections continue to be elevated in the reefer market. But on dry van, it's a much different story. But I almost kind of feel like because the threats of these tariffs and all these major disruptions are happening right around peak bid season, I kind of almost wonder if this is creating a shorter, more hurried bid season. Because if I can just hurry up and lock this in before anything happens, then that's one more aspect that I have control over,
Yeah, I think we definitely are feeling that. And the timing's interesting, but also, we were discussing it today on our Market Monday call with Christopher Thornycroft that, there's the specialized segment really took a hit with capacity leaving the market, right? It's more expensive to run a reefer. The just including maintenance, fuel, insurance. And so I think we've seen percentage-wise more refrigerated capacity leave the market when compared to dry. You brought up the dry contract acceptance earlier. So I think the timing of it is interesting. It really is, and it's creating some uneasiness, and I do think that speaks to what our customers are trying to do and trying to save as much money as they can with their current rates and RFPs.
I think that call out you have of the specialty market is always kind of the exception to what's ever happening. As a former flatbed, I'm sorry, specifically the lowboy flatbed broker, it's difficult. You know, it's difficult. It's not great. It's not because like when that capacity, even when you have one or two trucks leave the market in an area for that specialty provider or that specialty carrier, you're like, there's such a bigger hole because you're just like, what do I do now? Like, I can't just go find someone that has this very specific trailer and also is good at what they do. Like, you're just kind of left going, crap. Okay, I can figure this out.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when you talk about flatbeds, we're talking about very segmented capacity. Reefer has it as well, but flatbed even more. A ton of owner offs, a ton of small carriers. I don't have the numbers, and I don't know that anyone does, but I would say the average flatbed carrier is probably 15 to 25, maybe 30 trucks and trailers, compared to a much larger dry van, market. When you look at an individual carrier, the average trucks that they have probably be, I don't know, 2, 3, maybe 4 times that.
Yeah, because I mean, even within that specialty, you have potentially 4 to 5 different trailers that you would need just for a flatbed load. But we're not here to talk about flatbed today because I could talk about that for a very long time.
We can
Um,
talk about flatbed and food and for a very long time. Sure.
exactly. Maybe that'll be the next episode, flatbed and food.
Yeah, that would be a weird one. I don't know how you could connect the dots on that one. We'll see.
Hey, I could do it. Um, anyway, jumping back to our main topic, um, when you have a global supply chain and then there start getting rifts in there or potentially tensions of tariffs on both sides of both importing and exporting, what have you seen any of your shippers, start to look for some different source some different ship suppliers in different countries in different regions? Have you seen any of that, or have you seen everyone just kind of go, we're gonna wait and see?
Well, I haven't seen that yet. I certainly think we can anticipate that. And when you talk about, maybe supplier relationship shifting or strategies shifting, I I think we did see some different strategies in Q4 last year. We definitely saw an increase in dried imports. And I think we also saw that in the frozen segment as well. It's a little bit harder to track. Of course, the US, and with just like any, most imports, we import more frozen food than any other country annually. And it's hard to peg, but I believe it's probably around 40% of refrigerated food coming in is probably frozen. A lot of that being seafood. About, I want to say 60%, or right around 60% of our seafood consumed in the United States is import. So when we talk about the different tariffs on different products, we're going to see seafood probably have a larger impact when it comes to cost there, and compared to, everyone's talking about steel right now, right? How the tariffs are going to affect steel. The U.S. imports, let me say this, the U.S. consumes and uses around 100 billion, I think it's 100 billion to 150 billion in steel. When you talk about seafood, comparatively speaking, that's about 100 to 120 billion. So we're talking about similar size, but when you talk about steel, they're importing around, I think it's around 25%, maybe 35% of steel. When you compare that to 60% of seafood, I mean, that's going to be significant. And so we're going to be watching that closely. But I do think, kind of getting back to your original question, I do think we saw some strategy change in Q4, and that's probably still ongoing. But I have not seen supplier changes yet, but I believe some of our U.S. importers are certainly reaching out to different areas, because these tariffs are going to be different depending on country, region, and who knows how long they're going to last too. So there's going to be a lot of moving parts, and it's going to be an interesting year.
I think that this year is gonna be like so 2020 and 2021, it was kind of a, "Oh, man, how fast can we get things caught up? How like, how resilient is our supply chain?" And we found some pretty gaping holes in a lot of them. And so that kind of led you to 2022, 2023, where you can kind of shore those up, if you will, shore up your defenses a little bit. And now I feel like it's, "Let's test it. Let's see." This is that stress test that's not really a test. It's just a, here's all of these pressures that, hopefully you've created a resilient and dynamic and, agile supply chain over the last few years that really lets you kind of move as you need to move and um just really kind of be that flexible part because I think that's really going to be tested this year because you're going to need to be flexible because things are going to change quickly and then also you're going to need to be able to move just as fast.
Yes, I mean, when you, after you say that, I think service, I think of cost, and one thing that we noticed in the last I don't know month or so, especially early January, we saw customers saying, hey, we're going to them and said, hey, capacity's still tight. We haven't really come out of the holidays. We've had some weather events. We're looking at maybe needing there might rates coming up. Now, you know what? We don't want to see rates come up. We'd rather there be some service that is sacrificed before we have those customers. So I wonder how long that's going to last, but I just can't imagine it'll last that long. And I'm sure they were looking at it more temporary perspective, but it is going to be it. The people that are going to be successful this year are the ones, to your point, that can move on the fly, creative, and just can solve the problems that are going to arise because they're going to be unpredictable. There's going to be some stuff that comes up that we just can't predict.
Yeah, and I think that it's, gone are the days which honestly, this is something that I think regardless of what happens in the supply chains and, as different, things you have to react to, I think gone are the days where it takes you 2 to 3 months to make a business decision. I think that you need to be able to move a little bit quicker, and if it takes you months to just kind of work it up the chain, make a decision, then have it come back down, I think that that's only gonna just increase loss and really make it harder for you to thrive and be successful.
I hope that's true. I like to move a little faster, and sometimes, as fast paced as this business is, some of the elements of it can be very slow.
Yeah.
And I hope what you're saying right, and I hope that comes to fruition.
I hope so too. Because look, we don't need to be spending 6 months making a decision on, what new carrier we need to bring on. Like, we don't need to be spending 6 months making that decision. We need to be making these quicker and, finding new ways to make things efficient. But yeah, we'll see. We shall see how the year shakes out. Um, so kind of jumping back into any potential tariffs or existing things, what challenges are going to be created as a result of maybe some as a result of these tariffs, and like how does that really help, how does that really affect maintaining that efficiency and also those relationships that you have, because if suddenly everything is going to be anywhere from 10 to 30% more, how do you maintain those relationships while also being like, I'm sorry, things are about to get really expensive.
Yes, I think some of the challenges for us will be having to shift capacity to different regions of the country based on volume shifts. If product tends to come in through the Southwest through different ports there, and then all of a sudden that's going into some ports in the Southeast or the Northeast or into Houston. I think in the past we've been able to really set our watches to the seasonality and the changing just the volume shifts that come with that. But there might be a disruption there. There might be some changes in where that volume is coming out of. And I think we're going to have to make sure that we're keeping our finger on the pulse of capacity even more than we normally would. And that's where carrier relationships are going to become even more critical than they've been in the past.
I am I've long since said that ever since the pandemic, it's really gonna come down to relationships because you have you had the relationships of having those carriers that you could rely on, and everyone was printing money during the pandemic. It was great. Everyone was having a good day. And then it flipped. And then it really became okay, well, how can I work with my carriers to make sure that they're still covering their costs, but my shipper isn't getting charged unnecessarily? And then now that we've kind of had rates stabilize a little bit, it's that flip. And so how do you also then advocate for your shipper and those carriers to say, hey, we had your back before. This would be a great time now to charge us an insane amount of money to move things. So I think it's that real relationship is really that key piece to know that, okay, I've had your back, you got to have my back. And it's just, you really have to say that we're working as a team. We're not just here to take advantage of each other.
Yes, I mean, we've definitely been strategic about how we've approached our carrier relationships and what that's going to look like in the eventual, or the obviously that there's this market will turn around eventually, right? So when that happens, we're trying to keep those relationships with carriers that seem rational and have the vision to realize that there are markets and there's shifts and there's cyclical type events. And we'll see though. I mean, there's been a ton of large carriers, especially in the reefer world, because of the expense of the trailers, that have said, hey, we're not going to chase the carrot. When these rates turn around, we're not just going to go ahead and add 100 trucks and trailers to our fleet. We're not going to get caught in that trap. We'll see if they end up making that happen and can actually stick to their guns on that, because that would create some type of delayed cycle, where it wouldn't, it's going to come up and then it probably maybe stay up a little longer as those larger carriers are slower to add trucks and trailers. We'll see if that happens, but we're trying to stay in front of that. But my gut says that with the way insurance has just jumped up so much, insurance costs are crazy high. We're seeing in many cases double what they were paying 2 years ago for the same insurance. We're seeing fuel still somewhat high. We're in just the cost of a truck and trailer right now. I think it's going to be hard for these carriers to justify helping out these shippers. So I hope that what we've done for the past 2 years and the relationships that we've continued to develop and build on, try to take care of some of these carriers. And I hope there's a memory there, and I hope that we can all get along. But I'm not going to hold my breath.
Unfortunately, a hope and a prayer of we've had a great past few years doesn't necessarily negate the fact that that bottom line still needs to be hit.
Exactly.
So you mentioned that the obviously insurance costs and just the cost of operating as a motor carrier is up. That is undeniable. And then you have that combined with, so shippers are having to pay a little bit more because it costs more for a fleet to run. 100% understood. But then there's also potential tariff cost increase and, all the other fun stuff that comes with moving stuff like accessorials that are also on the rise. And then you have your general rate increases as well on top of everything. So are you seeing that shippers are starting to are you seeing them starting to absorb these costs, or are they just kind of continuing to pass it on and no one's really absorbing a cost somewhere?
I think in terms of the tariffs, I think many of these companies will absorb a very small portion of the cost. It will, of course, depend on the product and what kind of competition they have. And so, and of course, depending on their original margins. So depending on those margins, they may be able to take a little more on the chin than others. But I do believe that percentage will be small. A majority of these tariff costs will be passed on to the consumer. And the next question will be, with these consumers already being pressed with higher grocery prices, are we going to see sectors like the organic foods division, where they've had incredible growth over the last 10 years or so, especially since COVID, and also online grocery shopping, which has had incredible growth and continues to grow. But with those two different sectors, we see increased costs there. So are we going to see organic maybe start to just flatline or even shrink, and same for online shopping? So with these tariffs, it's certainly going to cost the consumer more, at least in the beginning. And I do think that we're probably going to see that, see consumers shift from, and we've also seen growth in generic as well. So I think we'll probably see growth in generic, maybe a little flatline in organic, and I think online shopping, depending on how you use it. 'Cause I've heard that you can save money because you're not in the grocery store making some of those maybe hungry buys, we'll call them. So, maybe online shopping's here to stay and will continue to grow. I think I saw something like within the next 2 years on its current pace, online grocery shopping will be the largest over, clothing and all the different things that are being purchased out there. So we'll see what happens. But I think a majority is going to be passed on to the consumer.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if online grocery shopping takes off even more because um it's convenient, it's easy. I know that I've personally taken advantage of it countless times. It's my favorite thing to do when you come home from a road trip is instead of sitting there going, "Oh, I have no food to eat in the house, like I have to go to the grocery store." I will just sit in the car or at the airport and like fill out my grocery order and then have it either show up at my house when I get there or first thing the next morning so I don't have to go to the grocery store. It's very convenient. It's very helpful. But also like there's just so much demand for that direct to consumer market that I don't see that slowing down anytime soon. I think the only thing that would make that slow down is if somehow it's so much more expensive than going to the grocery store itself. But I mean, aside, there's also like all those different programs that help reduce your delivery fees and all of that. So I would be surprised if we don't see that continue. I would be surprised if that is stunted at all.
Yeah, I like your strategy on when you travel to come back and not have to go to the grocery store because that's the last thing you want to do when you get back. And I've never used it, and I certainly will consider it now. So maybe you should be the spokesman for it. But have you had? I've heard some complaints about maybe the produce, some of their products weren't the quality that they would have expected if they were at the grocery store. Have you not had any issues like that?
Not entirely. The only I think, like, I've had to file, like, 1 or 2 complaints in, like, 5 years, and one was the driver, was just a heavy smoker, and so all the things that came in, like, a box smelled like cigarette smoke, and so, like but it wasn't the end of the world, I just had to, like, take my like, I remember my popsicles were really bad, and, so I just had to take the popsicles out of the box and put them in the freezer, which I know that's, like, a really weird thing to order, but, like, it just was. And I, like, left this whole thing. The biggest issue I've had is, like, with the swaps of not being, like, the right thing or, like, how did you get to this swap? But even then, there's pretty easy ways to combat that as well with just things, but that's getting too far into the weeds of an online grocery order.
Sure. Well, next time I travel, I'll make sure I have a grocery order waiting for me when I get home because that does sound like that's something I could look forward to.
It's very easy, very convenient. Speaking of groceries, Alan, we are coming to the end of our time together today, which means there's a question that everybody that comes on the show has to answer, and you, sir, are no exception. Are you ready for quite possibly the hardest question you'll be asked today? Is cereal considered a soup?
Is cereal considered a soup? Absolutely not. Okay, soup needs to be warmed up at least during the creation of the soup. I know some soups are served cold. I think soup also needs to be savory, and those two things are not what cereal is. So I think too, just to get off on a little tangent here, the best cereal on the planet is pretty undeniable. Captain Crunch Crunch Berries with number 2 Cinnamon Toast Crunch
Okay.
in a
All
close
right.
second. So
Those are some
but yeah, soup.
pretty hot takes.
Yeah, well, I mean, who would you put number 1?
Frosted Flakes all day, every day.
Oh my gosh, what is this, 1945?
Yes.
No way. No shot. No
Frosted
shot.
Flakes all day, every
You are a
day.
traditional woman. I like it. All right. I'll accept it.
I do love a good Captain Crunch Berries. That is my number
Sure.
2, specifically when
Okay.
they have the different themes for different holidays. Like they had a
Oh,
Christmas
yeah.
berry that was like little
Yes.
Christmas tree shapes. The way I bought that so fast. It
Oh,
was
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, the best
impeccable.
part about that, too, on January 1st, you might be able to get that for half off, too. Just buy about
You
10
didn't have to wait
boxes of
till
it.
January 1st. You can just towards the end of December, they mark that down to $2, and I'm like, "Buy 4 because I don't care if I'm eating Christmas
Clean them
cereal
out.
in July. It's $2. Imma buy that."
Absolutely. No, it's even better in July.
Exactly. As a reminder of what's to come.
That's right. That's right.
All right, Alan, if someone has maybe a different top two cereal recommendation, or if they have questions on kind of how to manage impending tariffs with their cold chain, where can they find you outside the show?
Sure. A Ruber at redwoodlogistics.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Alan Ruber.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
You can catch other episodes of Running on Ice right here on FreightWaves TV, YouTube, or anywhere you get your podcasts like Apple Podcast and Spotify. Need more Running on Ice news? No sweat. Subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/runningonIce. See you on the internet.